All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining another deep dive video. My name is Jackson. Joining me again is my colleague, Dom Simpson. And boy, do we have an exciting one planned today. At Neota, our elevator pitch is the leading no-code platform for the intelligent automation of processes, documents, and expertise. Now, we've always believed that the concept of processes, documents, and expertise doesn't stop just at legal. In fact, these 3 points of automation can almost be applied to any functional department in any industry we can think of. That's the power of automation, and that is the power of Neota. Now, we have a bit of a soft spot for procurement, and that's why I think we have probably one of the more exciting and useful use case templates coming up in the 10.8 platform update, the request for proposal management, or RFP for short. Now, it's exciting for a couple of reasons. Number one, it provides our users with a significant starting base to automate what is traditionally a very manual and process-driven activity. And number two, the team has built in a pretty nifty functionality, if I can say so, whereby it allows anyone to construct the form, the sections, the questions of an RFP without touching any of Neota's authoring tools. So what does it look like? Well, this is this is the workflow of the template that we have built. So the solution seeks to manage the complete end-to-end RFP process, including the RFP generation, the vendor submissions, any automated weighted scoring assignment, any review, and of course, analysis. So among other things, this template will provide you with a starting block to digitalize your RFP documentation that goes out to the market, to vendors, allow vendors to submit answers digitally through a solution built on the Neota platform. So no longer do they have to submit Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, or PDF documents. Allow a degree of flexibility to set each RFP question and have it assigned to a vendor. Use an admin solution, in a sense, to retrieve vendor answers and calculate the overall weighted score, if there are any, for their submission. There is a degree of flexibility, again, to use a combination of pre-assigned criteria or manual scoring by the issuer of the RFP, and then the ability to compare and analyze all vendor weighted scores and answers through the one admin solution, which you can see on the second workflow on the slide there. So in saying that, I think it might be over to you, Dom, for the actual demo.
All right, I'll get my screen up. And as you can see from Jackson's slides, there are actually 2 workflows that set up this solution. And the one that we start with is the RFP creation. So this is a user coming in and wanting to kick off an RFP and create that RFP. So you get some background information at the start, and then you're asked essentially some very initial questions to work out whether an RFP is actually required. So these can obviously be customized to your organization's requirements. We've just put in a simple sort of question about whether or not there's a specific vendor required and the anticipated budget. And depending on your answer, it determines whether or not an RFP is required. So in this case, an RFP is required, we'll continue on. And then we've got it asking just for the initial details of the RFP. So I'm going to do a laptop purchase RFP, purchasing laptops, and you can choose a submission date. So once the submission date is passed, the vendors won't be able to submit their responses. So we'll pop that in for next week. And then you can list out the vendors who are to receive the RFP. So I'm just going to pop myself in, as well as myself again, a slightly different email. So then comes the sort of interesting part of the template, which Jackson alluded to, where you can actually set up the questions in the browser. So you're not in the authoring tool, you're actually designing the questions that are customized for the RFP within this form. So let's say we were going to ask some specific questions about the fact that it's a laptop purchasing RFP. So we'll let's call this form specifications. So this is the form that you're setting up, and this will be the web page that the vendors will eventually see and put their responses into. So this is form text. You can put in a little description, some more information for the vendors, and then you're crafting your questions. So you could have a question like, please list the specifications of your laptop supplier. And then you've got the option for how the user is allowed to answer. So we've got a few different data types in the list to enable different types of responses. So it could be a yes, no, that's probably not quite the right option here. This is probably going to be a multi-line text where they're actually getting a text box to put their responses in. And then I can choose the weight for that question. So let's assign it a weight of, let's say 5, and we'll see how that works later. And you can also choose to restrict the response to 500 characters if you don't want your vendors writing too much in the response. So we can tick that. And then we can also add another question. So this could be, let's go for a different type of question, proposed fulfillment date. And we'll choose our data type this time as a date. And you can see there's a few different other options. So you could have a checkbox and you can choose your different options that the vendor can respond to. But for this one, we're going to choose date, and I'll just set a weight for 4. You can keep adding forms and questions, but as you're going, you can also preview them, and this will help you see what it will look like to the vendor. So here you can see we've got a nice text box for them to enter in their response, and then they've also got a date input for the fulfillment date. So as you're building it out, you can return to editing and keep previewing as you're building, so you're getting a kind of live demo of what you're creating. Once you're finished, you click the Finish Form Creation button, and that takes you to a final page. At this point, we've got a reviewer pathway in the workflow. So this will send off an email to the review team that just lets them know there's a request coming in, and they're able to review it. So this could be the procurement team. You could have business users at the start and then a procurement team reviewing what the business user has set up. Or you can even skip this whole process if you do want to take it out of the workflow if you don't have that kind of level of review required. But what we've got here is someone coming in and just reviewing that everything is set up correctly for the RFP. They can add vendors, they can change the description, all of that. And they can also change and alter the questions that appear on these forms. So they go through the same sequence as the business user, just kind of tidying up anything or adding other questions if they'd like. Again, at the end, they're going to hit Finish Form Creation. And at this point, it takes you to the dashboard. So this is the dashboard where you're actually able to have a look at the vendor responses. At this point, there hasn't been any because we've just sent it out. So it's just let you know we've sent off the RFP to the vendors that you've identified, but at the moment, no responses have been received. But we've sent it out to 2 people, so we're just waiting on their responses. So because I entered myself in as the recipient, we'll see that vendor email come through. So now I'm the vendor and I've received an email and I'm able to submit my response to the RFP. So we'll load that up, and what we've got is some just basic questions already in there. So company A, contact email in. And what we've got here is actually some questions that will appear for every RFP. So before you saw us kind of crafting some custom questions, but you can also have questions that appear in every single RFP. So those really general questions that you might want to make sure that you're getting ticked off, or things like security questions, you can make sure that those appear all the time in every RFP. So we've given you some sample ones, but you can of course change those as suits. So I'll just pop in some quick answers there. And then on the next page is when we see our custom questions and our custom form. So you can see that's the form that we set up, and then we've got the question and the date. So you could, response, you're just popping in the response to question, and then we're picking a date as well from our date picker. Continue, and then we've just got a quick sort of declaration. Of course, you can customize this as well with your own terminology, but this is just to show that you can have some things in here that are fixed and that will appear in every RFP. And then, as you saw on the previous page, you can also have things that are customizable per RFP. So we'll submit that response as the vendor, and we get a little notification that that's been sent. And now, back as the original party that created it, I'm now receiving an email that lets me know that a response has been received. So we get an email indicating that the response has been from company A and a link back to that dashboard that we saw earlier. But now we've got one of the responses coming in. So for each vendor that responds, so you can have lots of vendors, there'll just be a new card that appears for each response. So when we're on the dashboard, there's a couple of different things that you can do. The first thing that you might want to do is review the individual response. So I can go into company A and have a look at what they've answered. So we've got the questions that were fixed showing up here. And then we've also got the questions that weren't fixed, the custom questions sitting here. And for those, we assign some weights. You could, of course, assign weights to these as well if you wanted. We have only implemented it for the custom questions, though. So here you can assign your score. So let's say they got 4 and maybe 2 for that one. Once you hit save score, you'll be able to return to the dashboard, and that gets updated with the total score of the company. So obviously, if you've got more vendor responses, you can very quickly just compare the scores that you've assigned to them. Sometimes, though, you might want to deep dive into a particular question and compare the responses between 2 different vendors. And that's when you hit compare responses. We've only got one, so you'll only be able to see one vendor's response, but it's the same sort of theory as soon as we had more vendor responses. So we come in here to compare, and it basically asks which questions do you want to have a look at. So let's pick both and continue on. You could just pick one though if you want, or you can pick all of them. And what you'll see is the question. So we've got the question text here or here, and then each vendor is listed underneath with their response. So you can very easily compare the responses of the different vendors. Finally, once you're happy that you've chosen who you want to award the RFP to, and you've gotten all of the responses that you're after, you click on the Award RFP button, and you can assign, obviously, if you had a few more, you might have a choice, but we'll pick company A for now, and we'll hit confirm and send email, and it will let us know that company A has been notified, as well as the unsuccessful vendors. So there's an email that goes out then, notifying company A. And that essentially is the end of the workflow. So that's what we've built. That's the template solution. And there's obviously quite a bit in there, but there's a lot that you can customize as well.
Yeah, and I think that's key, right, Dom? The ability to really utilize, the entire template for your own RFP workflow, or taking bits and pieces out of the template, and specifically the non-authoring tool functionality, which we've built into this to allow somebody from maybe within the business who hasn't had the exposure to Neota before, but still wants to create a runnable solution, especially if they have the domain knowledge to actually create those questions in an RFP. They don't actually need to go into an authoring tool like Canvas or like Studio to create the questions, which I think is really useful. And I think a template like this is really useful, where you have maybe reoccurring, smaller RFP processes. You might have an event and you want to hire a photographer, or you want to hire, a contractor to help with a piece of work, which is, not a major RFP. I think this template here is really useful to be reused, for different purposes, different RFPs consistently. So I think that's one of the real advantages of using a template like this one in your organization.
And the other thing is you can take this beyond RFPs, because you've got that kind of ability to customize the questionnaire. There's no actual reason that this needs to be in a particular use case of an RFP. It's just what we've chosen to kind of demo the functionality. But if you take out the terminology around RFPs, it could really be anything where a business user is able to create a questionnaire that goes through a review process, that gets sent off to a counterparty, and then it comes back to a dashboard where you can view them, compare them, etc.
You could even take it a step further and apply, an IT security assessment process using this template, where then you can compare people's answers, overall, of course, but then I think question by question is very important. You can really do a deep dive into how vendors or how respondents have answered a particular question, and have that all appear for analysis on the one page in the one app. So I think that's really useful. I think the other point we haven't touched on, which should be obvious, especially if you're a customer of Neota, is that you can certainly customize every which part of everything that you've seen on screen that Dom has shown, from the look and feel to obviously the text, the formatting, the branding, etc.
Yeah, and even in the workflow, there's sort of elements of the workflow that you could easily decide, it's not particularly relevant to your scenario. As I mentioned before, this reviewer lane, it doesn't necessarily need to be there. You could pull this all up into the business user and have them creating the RFP without the need for the review. So there's a lot you can customize. All of the text, all of the themes, of course, is all customizable. So we've done that before with the MSA. We've kind of rethemed it so it looks quite different to what we've just demoed. So of course, yeah, every heading, every notification, all customizable.
Cool. I think that might be about it. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Well, this will be available in the library, which is accessible through your workbench in a couple of weeks when 10.8 is released. So hopefully you're able to utilize it. If not the entire template, certainly some of the functionalities that we've built into it. Thanks for watching.